Nobody wants to go first. I'll do it.
Go ahead.
Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. What therefore you worship is unknown. This I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God, perhaps grope for him and find him. Though indeed he is not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said. For we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead.
Thank you. Okay, very good. So are you guys familiar with this reading? Have you heard it before?
Yes.
Probably Father Steve hasn't. I don't know. Just playing on you, Steve. All right. Give me some initial thoughts on this, and then I'll ask a few questions. So what do you have?
Paul's using things that people know and are familiar with as a segue into introducing them to Christianity.
Yeah, he's using the things that he sees around him, right? And how is he doing that? So how would you characterize his approach to the people of Athens that he's speaking to?
He's trying to reason with them. He's trying to say, okay, here's something familiar, and this unknown God. Well, I have an answer to who this unknown God is. And
Right.
he's kind of playing on their the people of Athens prided themselves on being open-minded and educated, and so he's trying to build on something that they already knew about in order to introduce them to Christianity.
Yeah, I think that's an important concept. I think that you have to start with you have to know what the people you have to know your audience. You have to know what the people are like that you're talking to, what they know, what their values are, and like you said, their education. And I think Paul does that really remarkably well.
If you want to help someone, you have to go where they are.
Yes, you do have to go where they are. You can't expect them to come to us, right? So how does that approach translate to what we might need to be doing as a church? I think you touched on it, Camille.
We have to go with what we have, the reality that we have, and start from there, not from the reality that we had 6 months ago.
Well, that's true. That's very true today. right? Not even 6 months ago, 3 months ago, so we live in a very changed world right now, and we're having to figure out how we can still be church, which means how can we reach people when we can't gather? But the church has always needed to do what? What have we always needed to do, but haven't done that well really in modern times, at least not in mainline churches?
Bring people to the gospel, bring people to Christ. That's what we're supposed to be about.
Okay, or I would maybe phrase it differently. Maybe saying
evangelize.
Yes, so evangelization is not bringing people,
It's
taking the gospel to people.
We're reaching out to them.
Right, you're reaching out to them. And it seems to me that the church has not done a good job. Some churches have not done a good job of doing the reaching out part and expecting people to come in. So, Paul's not in Jerusalem saying, hey, come on down to Jerusalem and come into the temple and I'll teach you about Jesus. Or come into to the home in Corinth or wherever those early Christian communities met. They actually have to go out to the people, and that's what he's doing here, right?
I think what Camille said was just so apt, meeting people where they are, and that's why it's so important to do things like the service projects we do, feeding people. I mean, I can't think of anything that brings people to God more than having had their physical needs met. Seeing people helping them is more likely to convert someone than words.
It's an attention getter, actually. I mean, by feeding someone, you've refocused their attention from being hungry to something else. They're not having to. You have to meet people's basic needs, whether that's housing or food or healthcare or whatever, before they're open to even hearing these things. They can't hear these things if they're suffering. Thoughts on that?
Well, I think the church is more open to a lot of people, or accessible now that it's YouTube and all those other IT things that people can sit in their own home and at their own time actually go on a church website or whatever and hear the word, and maybe that'll make them feel more comfortable. It's not a strange thing. It's not something that's unrecognizable. It's not way out there. I'm right here and I understand, I think in a way it's a good thing.
So really this stay-at-home situation or pandemic thing is forcing churches to reach out to people.
Yes.
Because people can't come to them, even if they wanted to at this point. We have to reach out to people. And that's a fundamental change in many churches. And it's a step into a really uncomfortable zone for us because we don't have experience with doing this and we're learning.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul, he went to Athens. He didn't expect the Athenians to come to him. And he went to where the people were. And he talked about their culture. And he didn't, did he tell them how wrong they were to believe what they believed?
Tom and I were having a discussion about whether or not Paul was being sarcastic.
Mm.
And I said no, but he still thinks there's a touch of sarcasm there.
Well, I think Paul was certainly using what was in front of him against the Athenians in a sense, to make his argument. So, but I don't know that he was doing it sarcastically, but I wasn't there, so hard to know.
In a very go ahead. You go ahead.
The fact that he used what they were doing, he used what was familiar to them to this altar with the unknown God. He incorporated what they were comfortable with in order to give them a different message.
Yeah, and he didn't come up there like so many evangelists do, which gives evangelism a really bad name, which is to come up and begin by condemning the people for their unbelief or their different beliefs or their wrong beliefs, right? You know, they don't tell people right off the bat they're going to hell. You know, he's not doing that. Why? Why is he not doing that?
Because they won't listen.
Right. They would just tune him out, wouldn't they? I mean, most people would tune him out.
They would become defensive.
Telling someone they're going hell is not a good way to win friends and influence people.
Or just, right, that's right. Dale Carnegie, could really benefit from that. So you don't criticize people if you want their attention, you know? You have to find some common ground. And how did he do that?
Well, he appealed to what they're most proud of. I mean, he appealed to their human intellect. You've already built an altar to an unknown God. I'm telling you that this is an unknown God is very close at hand, you know. And he said, you know, we have our being and existence with him. This is why you got to hold to him right there.
Right.
He pointed out and used initially their pride and their intellect to point to them that it's them who've already done it without knowing it.
Right. So they've already kind of discovered God already. And he kind of comes on like, I'm just going to help you to the next step. Okay. You don't know who this unknown God is. I can tell you who that is. But he also praises them in the beginning. He says, Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. That's a lot of flattery, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know? See him saying, oh yeah, of course we are. We're Athenians. A lot better than the Spartans. Yes.
On a simplistic way, they have so many gods that they don't even know which one they're supposed to worship. And he says we're all basically lazy. I'm sorry, we are. Hey, don't keep up with all. You don't have to remember all that stuff. I got one of it all.
Yeah.
And
he simplified, right?
And you're part of it.
He simplifies a very complex system in which I don't think they could just pick and choose. I think they eventually had to kind of pay homage to all of the gods if they wanted to be favored, you know, in whatever department that God was in charge of, you know.
You were part of it. That was one of the first things, telling the people that this God is part of you, like your father. You're our children, you know.
Yeah, so he brings God close rather than as a sense that these gods are very far off and kind of removed from the people. He says this God is different. This God is very close to you.
To me, the thing here is that God is among us. You know, it's not a stone. It's not a image. We are His offspring, and we're made in the image of God. And to find God, you need to go out and look among us. That's where He's gonna dwell and where He's gonna exist. It's not in some building or on some altar or in some figure that you put up on a statue. You know, it's God is us. It's our community. It's what we do, and we are made in His image, and that's a pretty powerful message to me.
Good, Doug. Good.
That God is knowable, and we're made in God's image. I mean, I don't think that that's probably what they were thinking about their other gods. Very much a separation. So how would that have all been received, do you think?
For the first time, maybe.
Athens was a university town by this time. Their golden age lasted 50 years, really. That's all. And from Thermopylae to the beginning of the Peloponnesian War, and everything that we exalt about Athens comes from that period of time. Then there was Alexander of Macedon, and then there was Rome, And by this time, they were a finishing school town. The Romans went there in order to be cultured. So it was a university. It was like Cambridge or Oxford by this time.
So it was highly intellectual then. It was all of the things you would think of in an academic setting.
Yeah, and so he goes there, and instead of talking about the Jewish prophets, which he had done before in the synagogues of Asia Minor about three chapters ago, he went and he started with what they thought and how they thought, and he was willing to argue, and he was willing to lose the argument. And I think that's an important technique that Paul shows us. We sometimes we don't have enough faith in God to lose the argument and let God do the work. But Paul does.
Yeah, we think it's you have to come out as a winner, or you've embarrassed yourself or disgraced the faith, and I think that keeps people from maybe talking about their faith. Is they're afraid that the other person's going to be able to argue them down. You know. I'll bring up a point, and then they argue it down, and then you'll run out of points to bring up. And it's shouldn't be that way. And how do we make it not that way? How did Paul make it not that way?
Make it that way. How
did Paul not get into this, debate with them?
He kind of conceded the point before he began.
Yeah,
it was a very
took a little of the wind out of the sails, didn't he?
Yep.
You know, I'm sure many of them gathered around ready to start calling him out or talking him down or what have you, and he took a lot of the wind out of their arguments at the very beginning. But how else did he not get into a debate? What did he do?
Doesn't look to me like he gave him an opportunity to respond.
He just kept talking and they couldn't respond, right?
They do respond at the end of not in this particular passage, but when we run off the end of the map, then they do respond. Not all of them positively.
Yeah.
For me, the first charge is that for you have to realize in him we live and move and have our being. And you have to figure out how God is in you before you can go out and pass it on.
Okay.
Yeah, he's using their concepts. He's quoting them again. He quotes Greeks 4 or 5 times in his either in his letters or in his speeches. So he's admitting, here's where you guys are right, and he starts from there.
Mm-hmm. Right, and they're not going to argue against themselves, so it takes a little of the argument away, so that at that point now he's got their attention, I think, a little bit more, and then he talks to them about a God that's unknown, but a God different than their other gods. That's very appealing. And what's so appealing about the God he talks about?
God doesn't have any human weaknesses.
Okay. Yeah, this God is much more powerful than those gods, for sure.
And he doesn't need shrines, and he doesn't need anything, because everything he has is his. Everything that's in existence is his.
Okay, so he's not asking anything of them. That's interesting.
God gives them life in all things.
Life, God gives them, right, this one God gives them life in all things. And this one God cares about them enough to know them. I mean, I can't imagine that they think the other gods even know who they are.
Well,
very one-way street, their worship of these other pagan gods.
He goes even farther. He says, you are God's offspring. So that means you're kind of close to God.
You're a demigod, right? Or whatever they used to call it. I'm not big on Greek mythology, but, yeah, I think so. So this is a model for us, is it? Is this a model of evangelism?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
I would say that one of the things that I see is in doing evangelism, you need to do your research. You need to have an idea of where the people are that you're speaking to, and what's important to them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you have to have all of those things.
You have to understand the culture you're going into instead of trying to change it.
Right. Or rejecting it and saying you're bad, you know, I'm going to offer you something good. You know, people just aren't going to listen to that. And so he starts in the right place, he gets their attention, and then he's able to deliver their message, and not all accept it, but he's able to deliver it, and it's heard by most, probably. I think that's all we're called to do. And I think that's what we're supposed to do. And that is our charge going forward, especially in this age in which we can't really gather together. Is one of the things what we can do is we can use this tool of the internet and these online tools we have at our disposal to, you know, to connect with people, and like he did. Any further thoughts on this passage? Craig, you want to say something?
Yeah. Well, what came to mind was Paul is the Nathaniel Green of the book of Acts. Nathaniel Green in our Revolutionary War was the general who was in charge of the battles in the South. Mm-hmm. He lost all of his battles and won the war. If you look at a map, there's a whole bunch of British forts that exist along rivers in the South. After each one of his battles, he retreats, but the British have to close a fort. They don't have enough forces left in that area. And he does that again and again and again. And each time the British win the battle and they have to retreat. They lose. And by the time he's done, there are no more British forts in the South. He wins the war in the South by losing all of his battles.
Right, he draws them away. You know,
he does. Paul goes into this and he loses the argument. I mean, people laugh at him for saying raised from the dead. They know this does not happen. A few of them say, well, we'll listen to you again about this. Very few believe him. When he was in Asia Minor in the synagogues, some people would like what he had to say and would believe, and then somebody else would come in and say that he was wrong, and they wind up stoning him. And so Paul gets almost killed in Asia Minor. He comes to Greece and does exactly the same thing again. He has this vision that he will not release. He will not let this go. Christ has saved him. He's seen him. He was on the road to Emmaus. He's been in all of this. He's got a message. He gives the message, and it does not matter what happens to him. He's free enough to lose the argument, let God do the work. And by the time he's done, there are more churches planted around the Mediterranean than ever they would have imagined could have happened. And he reminds me of what Hilaire Belloc said, that the church is a continually conquered thing that outlives its conquerors.
That's an interesting quote. But it's true. So the church just survives. And it survives, and then over time begins to thrive until it doesn't, and then it keeps moving. I guess it's a little like Nathaniel Green, you know, where we come in and we don't win the battle, but we survive, and the opponents have to withdraw. And so this is a form of evangelism that I think is a great model for us in thinking about how you talk with people about your faith. You know, you start out gently, you start out with understanding them first before you offer an alternate view.
It's often been said that where the church is persecuted the most, you have the most growth in your church. And that's been true in China for quite a while. And we know that so many of the churches have been persecuted there, and that's been increasing again. But interestingly, while there are few Christians in Iran, there are Christians, and that at the moment is the fastest growing church in the world.
Well, we become complacent when we don't have, I don't want to say persecution, but when we lose sight that we have a mission, which is to do exactly what Paul did, you know, which is to go out and take, you know, Paul. So courage is another characteristic of Paul. We have to be courageous enough to kind of keep that alternative story. If our story becomes the culture's story, or the culture becomes our story, we've lost. We've lost that battle, and then we don't have anything to offer because the culture is offering what we offer, and that's the mistake the church makes over and over again. And in free countries like ours, religiously free countries, you have the situation where we become complacent because our faith is so easy and we risk nothing. And that's what evangelism is. It is about risk. It's not easy.
I think by going through all this COVID, the church is regenerating itself.
We are reinventing ourselves. We are being remade. We are, pardon the pun, resurrecting in a new form, right?
Yes.
In a new form. We are going to become, and for a while, going to be primarily an online church in many ways, not only in worship, but with Bible study, you know, any fellowship stuff we do, having meetings, those kinds of things are going to look different for a long time.
But
Not
more
just
people,
another month.
more people are on their computers.
And more people are,
church. So,
yeah, more people are discovering that's the way they find that they get church now. I say, oh, if I need church, I got to get my computer. Now that's going to change, but it's going to change slowly, and it won't be the same. So, and we're going to have to talk about it. We have to navigate that and figure out what's best for us. Is there anything else we want to talk about on this lesson before we move on?
Yes, I have a general question. Why are we doing 2 New Testament lessons here? Tom and I were talking about this earlier.
Because it follows the Revised Common Lectionary. These are the readings from the Revised Common Lectionary.
Yes, Father Scott, that's the exact answer, but why?
I don't know. You'd have to ask the people that came up with this. Maybe Steve knows.
It's part of the Easter practice. Is the only thing I can tell you, because one of the things that happens is instead of thinking about what happens in Hebrew scripture at this time, we're concentrating on the proclamation of the New Testament.
Yep.
And the faith. We can use, oddly enough, there is an option to use an Old Testament lesson, but we tend not to use it at this time. So
it's true that when we were talking about this, we do this every Easter, right? We read Acts.
Yes, there's a lot of Acts in the Easter season because it's a story of it's the story of the post-resurrection Christian community, the first one. So it fits really well with that post-resurrection story for the 7 weeks that we're in Easter. Anything else? All right.
You know, last thing, even though Paul might have lost the arguments, he attracted huge crowds when he went in Asia Minor and all those other places, you know, and places like Ephesus and that. They said thousands and thousands of people would come out and listen to him. So he was saying something that resonated with the people at that time.
Yeah, I think I'm sure you're right. And the Spirit was moving with him.
It's a message of hope and love. It's a measure of God who is the God of everybody. You don't hear that in the pagan world. In the polytheistic world, all the little areas all have their own gods. Each city had its own god. But here Paul comes along and says that there's a unity to all of us, which we know. There's a unity in God, which we suspect. The Greeks have been talking about that for centuries without realizing it. And this God is not a God of caprice. He's a God of love. He's a God who will give you more than you deserve, more than you could even ask for. It's quite a message.
It is. and a much different, like you said, a much different message. It was an attention getter.
Mm.
Okay, let's move on to the gospel. I'm going to do that next. Can I get a volunteer to read?
Sure.
I'll do it.
Do it.
Jesus said, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him because he abides with you, and he will be with you. I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me because I live. You also will live. On the day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. They will have my commandments and keep them. Are those who love me, and those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them."
Thank you. There's a word in there, the word advocate. Advocate. What's an advocate?
Someone who stands up for someone else.
Okay.
Stands up for you and helps you and
listens to you.
Mediates for you on your behalf with someone else. In this case, with God.
Yeah, I think all those are true. Why is it important that we have an advocate? Why does Jesus, why does he say that the Father will give the disciples another advocate to be with them forever?
Reassurance will be heard, that someone will listen.
Comfort to comfort them.
Okay.
Well, it's reassurance that you're not by yourself. There's somebody there at your side, regardless of what you're doing.
Yeah. Someone on your side so that you're not by yourself and you're not having to go it alone, right? Isn't that the great, and what does that give you when you have someone by your side in that way?
Peace.
Peace. That's what I was thinking. You gain a lot of peace by knowing that there's someone there who's gonna be with you no matter what happens. You know.
Support.
Comfort and peace. What's that?
Support.
Support. Right. Support.
Keep you on the straight and narrow.
Well, a good advocate would probably be an honest advocate. So yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, there's a little butt kick in there, I think.
A little butt kicking. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Maybe that should have been in scripture, but didn't make it.
Scott, during this time, Christians were persecuted. And to decide to become someone knowing that you could be persecuted for that, to know that you have someone to plead your case in court, to give you the strength to do that, would also be a little bit more secure, give you a little more security.
Yeah, and the audience for John was a particularly insecure bunch of Jews, right? Christ-believing Jews, because they were no longer in communion with Jews in the synagogues, and they were kind of chased out. So, they were alone in some sense.
I think that the key here, it comes in the next paragraph. It says, I will not leave you orphaned. I think that's why he's sending the advocate. It gets to all the things that people have already said, comforter, confidence, so that they know they're not alone.
Right. He's preparing them because, he's going to die, and he knows that how stressful that will be upon this group. And so he's trying to reassure them. I'm sure at the time they didn't probably understand that, but they would be able to draw upon his words afterwards. What do you think about this? And this is something that kind of struck me when I was studying this. They who have, first of all, he says in the very first verse, he says, Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. What does that mean to you? What does that suggest to you, maybe?
I think here he's talking about the great commandments, to love one another.
Okay. Which all commandments fall under, right? All commandments fall under those two great commandments.
Well, you will love God. You love God with all your heart, with all your strength, all your mind, and all your.
Right. And love love everybody. Love God, love everybody else, and that's all you need to really worry about.
What we do is what we really believe.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what we do really tells people what we believe, right? It informs ourselves. So by keeping your commandments, then especially to love, which is the great commandment, it tells people who you are.
It tells me who I am.
Right, and it tells you who you are as well.
Richard Feynman, talking to the graduating class at Caltech years ago, said that in the laboratory, the first rule, he said, is you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. And he said, people in science do it all the time. And people everywhere, everybody will try to lie to themselves one way or another. And so it's what we do, and that tells me what I really believe. It's what I do.
Yeah.
Being honest with yourself is the hardest thing you have to do. It's really easy to not cheat people out of money or do this or do that, but being honest about what your motives are and why you're doing things and what you believe the outcome should be, that's very difficult. I find it difficult to do because I can always have a motive that'll justify my actions. And I would assume that there's a lot of other people out there who might not think the same way as me. So self-honesty is probably the most difficult thing we have to do.
It is, and it is about doing. I mean, it's about action speaking louder than words. You can say one thing, but if you don't do that thing, do you really believe it? Are you really that person? So he starts it with that, and then he ends this reading with, they who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me. And those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them. And commandments are what? They are calls to do something, right? Calls to action. They're not calls to belief. It seems to me that so much of Christianity in people's minds is about what do I believe and whether I have the right belief or the wrong belief. But that's not really what it is. It's really, how do you do what God is asking you to do? Do you do what God is asking you to do? That's how I know. That's how I know what I believe. That's how other people know what I believe. Thoughts?
God, is it unspoken that if you do not love me, woe be unto you?
I don't know about that. That may be where grace comes in, but That's maybe an Old Testament look at it. I think
I
it's
know
different.
things change a little in translation too.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I don't know if this is if there's something that we can glean from original language that would be different, and Craig would know that. I wouldn't necessarily.
Perhaps it depends on what we do with the woe. If the woe is spoken to us by God, do we then collapse in despair, or do we hitch up our pants and say, okay, where do I go from here?
Yeah, it's correction, right? We tend to look at criticism as condemnation first, rather than as an opportunity for correction of something that needs to be changed, right? We just do. We hear somebody saying, I don't like this about, or you're not doing this right or something, and we look at that as condemnation. And we sometimes don't see beyond that. Other thoughts on this? Go ahead.
It's quite a promise. I mean, he doesn't say you have to do it perfectly. You just have to keep the commandments. You have to try. You have to go for it. Yeah. Because that shows your sincerity and your faith, and over and over again, it just takes a mustard seed of faith for God to begin doing something in your life.
So I think we look at it also as love as the emotion, and you can keep the commandments and you can be really mad at God while you keep them, perhaps. You may, I think that it's really about, that's why it's doing, people who love are the ones that do the things. Not who talk about it, but who actually do them. So if you say you love the poor, and do something about that, do something to love them. And that goes for anything. So it's a matter of if you do what Jesus says to do, if the Father says to do, you're demonstrating love. I don't know that everybody understands that. I really don't.
I think the last sentence really explains a lot too. If you love by my Father, I will love them and reveal myself to them.
Being kind and showing forgiveness, those actions result in the emotion of love. And those are what basically the commandments are saying, is be as kind to the other as you would to yourself, and love and forgive others. And that's what results in the emotion of love, which is where Christ reaches us at this level. He says right here, in a little while, the world will not see me. They will no longer see me, but you will know me because I am within you. And that is that emotion of love that Christ brings to us when we do the command.
Yep. Any final words? Let's move on to the second New Testament reading, the epistle from Peter, 1 Peter. And can I get somebody else to volunteer to read this chapter 3, verse 13 to 22.
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
Now who harm you if you do suffer for doing what is right? You are blessed. Do not fear what they fear. Do not be intimidated, but in your hearts sanctify Christ as Lord. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and reverence. Keep your conscience clear so that when you are maligned, those who abuse you for your good conduct in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if suffering should be God's will, than to suffer for doing evil. For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He will put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which also he went and made a proclamation in the spirits in prison, who in former times did not obey, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah, during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were saved through water. And baptism, which this prefigured, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from your body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers made subject to him. The word of the Lord.
Thank you. Why do you think that Peter prefers kind of a very soft way of evangelizing? I mean, he's kind of advocating a very gentle evangelization of others, isn't he?
Well, we saw last week from Stephen that the in-your-face kind didn't didn't work real well.
That's a good point. Yeah, so he would have been there. He would have known. But does gentleness and reverence for others as you speak to them about your faith, what does that do for you?
Well, people listen better, yes.
Yeah. It's not too different from the approach Paul took today when he didn't get in their face about what he was going to talk about. He did it rather skillfully and gently. So how does that inform you when you speak about God to others?
I think it goes back to remembering where they are.
Okay.
I have a real hard time talking to others about God and telling my story. I really do.
Okay. Do you want to speak more about that?
I don't know.
Hey, you know what? I don't think you're alone.
You're not
here.
alone. You're certainly not alone. No.
So you're among friends.
It's just, like I could speak to you guys about my feelings, but you don't need conversion.
Talking to the choir.
Yeah.
Correct.
But I feel offended when Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons would come knock on my door. Well, they don't do that here because I live in a gated community. But before, when they would come to the door, really offended me that you would think that you needed to come to me and convert me. You didn't know.
So why did that offend you?
Because I'm a Christian person, and I have the beliefs, and I go to church, and I work for my church, and I love my God, and so I don't want to offend anybody.
Well, but that was a little different. You felt offended because you felt rejected by another Christian, whether they're Christian or not.
Yeah.
But people that come to you with the faith of the same God, and basically is saying, hey, your religion is not as good as mine, and you need to hear me so you can convert to the right one.
When they come to your door, they don't.
But that's different. That's different.
That you're a Christian. When they come to your door, they don't know you're a Christian.
But they don't.
No, but they'll continue the spiel even after they do. So.
No, I always say, I'm a Christian, and I love the Lord, and I just tell them how I feel about it, and then they usually shut up. They don't say anything more.
I usually add, I have a church.
Yes.
And then I say, thank you very much. Have a good day. Close the door.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then I think, is that being Christian?
I think that's what they want. They want to be shunned, and they want to be shut out, and because that gives them credit. I think. I'm not sure, but I think that's
I'm witnessing for the Lord, and I'm suffering.
Unless you're Craig and you invite them in and you enjoy the debate.
Oh man, they don't know what they're getting into if that happens. It's like,
I can see that one.
I have frequently been known to hand them a pamphlet and tell them I am an Episcopalian and look at their blank faces. They don't know what that is.
They don't even know.
And hand them a pamphlet and say, when you attend a service at my church, then you can come back to my house and I would be glad to discuss it with you.
Well, that's
And
a good approach in that sense. But what about the friend or someone in your circle of people that you know that's not another Christian, but maybe someone who doesn't go to church or who doesn't particularly believe, or is one of those nuns that are out there, people don't have any faith or even are anti-faith? How do you approach them? I mean, is this a good approach that Peter and Paul are advocating in the readings today?
Well, if they have faith and you talk to them, they may not have your faith, but they're Christian and they believe in the same things that you do, and they go to church regularly and enjoy their minister's sermon and stuff like that. I don't think you have to convert them. It's not like if they're not Episcopal, they're going to go to hell or something, So, but the ones who don't, who we have now, we have a friend who's a Messianic Jew.
Yeah.
And we try to talk to him. And our church does everything wrong, and it reaches a point where you start feeling non-Christian, so you stop the conversation,
Well, should we be having debates with Christians, other Christians, or other people that, I mean, there has to be there has to be some reception.
Yeah.
There.
Well, it usually starts it,
Yeah.
At my age, I find that I have a couple of acquaintances that went to church, understand the whole thing, but for one reason or another got, off with the whole church and just don't go. And I don't see how I approach somebody in their 70s that, that already knows the fundamentals, but just has chosen to not do church.
So I don't.
It sounds like, yeah. These are all hard questions, and I think one of the things that we're reluctant to do is to enter into an argument with a friend, but it's not about arguing, is it?
I still think the best way to do is not to argue with them is to talk about why you like the church you're in or what the church does for you, or and not necessarily as an attempt to have a debate with them. You can invite the conversation, but they don't even have to respond. It could be something as simple as saying, I was in church on Sunday and I heard Father Scott say X, Y, or Z, and it really meant a lot to me, especially if it's in the context of a broader conversation.
To me, the most powerful thing you can do in any of those conversations is tell people how God's been working in your life and what he's been doing for you. And if you can articulate that and let the other people know what's going on with you, that's the thing to me that attracts them. It's not me arguing them into the ground, because they're not, even if they lose, they're going to go away just being hacked off at me. If I can convey to them what's happened in my life, then I have a much better chance of reaching them as compared to just winning the argument.
Yeah, I've heard that, yes, you should just tell them your story. You should just tell them your story. And I have had several Jesus moments, but sometimes I don't like to share them.
Well, but that's it's our experiences and our story. That's all we have to share.
Yeah.
It is those experiences of Jesus you had that are real to you that need to be shared with people.
We have those opportunities every day. I was in the grocery store with people who were hoarding, This other woman would say that wasn't hoarding. She was older than I. She says, they don't have any faith. I says, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. So.
No, nobody can deny your story. It's your story.
Right.
And you're not telling them that your story must become their story. You're simply sharing your story. and they may disagree with you at the moment about the meaning of your story. But something that Chesterton reminds us of is what he calls the unanimous witness of little things. If more and more people tell their story and it sounds suspiciously like yours, they will remember that at the right time.
Yeah.
And pretty soon your story will become theirs because they will want it that way.
Right. So tell your story. Tell the weird experiences you've had with Jesus that you think that people will reject, because they won't. They'll listen to it. They may not understand it, but they'll listen to it. And if they have respect for you, that works in their head. You know, they say, well, geez, this person's really smart and you know, pretty rational person, and they've had this incredible experience. How do I interpret what they just told me? So tell your story, and don't get in arguments, and don't worry about that they didn't commit to coming to your church. Just tell the story over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. It's not that I want them to come to my church, but I would like them to believe.
We would all like to talk to people, give them a you know, the sinner's prayer, and have them come to belief. It doesn't work that way in most people. It just doesn't. And so you're not going to see the fruits of the labor that you put forth, but you and others down the road may have a huge impact on that person's life.
Hopefully we're not the planters of the seed.
Sometimes it takes a long time.
Yeah.
Leah Libresco said that she was an atheist when she went to Yale, and 4 years later, in debating with Christians, she became a Christian. Holly Ordway knew a pastor, I think he was a Methodist, but he might have been a Christian anyway. Sorry. But she knew him for about 10 years. She would regularly have dinner at their house. They would talk about it, and at the end of 10 years, she became a Christian. Sometimes it takes a long time for this to happen. But it's the story. It's the story.
It clicks, and I think the Spirit has a lot to do with the timing of that. You know, it just finally came together for that person. You know, the right time, whatever, the right circumstances. You're just one in a string of witnesses. You know, we've had. You know, you're just part of the cloud of witnesses. But we're called to be witnesses, not just be the cloud. And so we have to tell our story. So don't be afraid to tell your story. Don't think it's don't think it's intrusive like another Christian trying to convert another Christian.
Yeah.
I'm not into that myself. If you're a Baptist or even a Methodist, you know, I respect that. And I respect, if you're a person of God, even outside of Christianity, if you're a person of God, of the one God, and you follow that one God in the best of your ability, I respect that. And I'm not going to try to convert you. I'm not going to try to convert the Jew who's a religious Jew and who does the things that and loves in the way and follows the commandments of God that we do because they're a Jew. Yeah, I'm not interested in that. I think it's a waste of time. There's plenty of people out there that don't even know. You know, the problem with today's people, so many people, they weren't raised at all with religion. They weren't raised at all with church. So they don't even know the stories. You know, the stories we all know from our childhood, even the basic ones, they don't know at all.
Yeah.
They don't know any of it. They know nothing.
I wasn't trying to convert the Messianic Jew. He was trying to convert us.
Well, that's his mistake. Okay, that's his mistake. And that's the mistake of a lot of other Christians. When they try to do that, and it infuriates me, actually. You know?
The conversion comes when the Spirit of the Lord enters you.
Yeah. It's the Lord's work. We're just kind of, we have to be there to receive people when they're ready to hear the message and deliver the message. That's our job.
But then there's the type of person that you try to talk to, and you say, if you go to God, I mean, he will give you so much more. He wants you to ask him for more. And the person will say, I don't need God because I have everything I need, and I if I need it, I go out and get it. I'm self-sufficient. And I think that goes back to Adam and Eve. But I think that's a big problem with some people. They think they don't need God because they have everything. They got money, they've got beautiful homes, they got nice cars. They don't need God. I think, that's a hard nut to crack.
Well, it is until they do. Until they do need God. When that system fails them, when that false security crumbles.
Yeah.
And these are times when we see that. These are times when people lose their jobs and other things, and their neatly constructed world begins to change. And then their whole system of beliefs, their whole self-sufficiency doesn't work anymore. Then what?
Yeah, then what do you do?
Yeah.
You come
all right.
You come
to me and I'll tell you what to do.
No, you get a big gun and you put on a mask and you go protest.
Well, there's a lot of ways that people handle it, but our job is to tell our story. Our job is to continue to tell our story and not to worry about it, and take some risks. Risk that friendship. I mean, you're not. I don't know how you risk a friendship by telling what's true to you. Most people don't say you didn't really experience that. I mean, they're not going to do that. So I don't know what we're afraid of so much, but we are. So let's work at that, and that's all the time we have for today. If there's any last parting words, if not, then I'm going to close in prayer.
You in an hour.
Let us pray. Oh God, you have prepared for those who love you such good things that surpass our understanding. Pour into our hearts such love towards you that we, loving you in all things and above all things, may obtain your promises, which exceed all that we can desire. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, hallelujah. It's Easter. Don't forget, church starts at 11. So I've sent you a link.
We'll be there.
Yeah. We'll see, because I can see you. I'm going to get my little thing, and I'm going to look for you.
Romper room.
The romper room thing, right? Okay. All right. Thank you all. I'll see some of you back with me at noon for the Bishops' Committee meeting. So and don't forget about Craig's
we'll see
prayer
Craig.
time tonight, evening prayer time.
Yeah, I emailed the link again this morning.
Hi, Nancy.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.